What's going on, everybody? It's the Reformation Keegan, and I'm here today with another great comic review. So, I've been able to read a lot of comics lately. I've just been able to create some time to do so, and it's been a lot of fun. And one of the things that I really wanted to get into was the lore of the Green Lantern Corps. So the Green Lantern Corps, it was always intriguing to me, but I never got into it right away. It took me a bit, but I wanted to read the entire Sinestro Core War. So this is Volume Two. I have Volume One over on my other table, but I love this cover, and this covers the last half of the entire Sinestro Core War. So I picked this one to read because I have been really intrigued, and also with the Superman movie coming up and Guy Gardner being in it, it actually motivated me to read more Green Lantern. Hence why I read it about a week or so ago. So I've been thinking about how to analyze the Sinestro Core War because you can watch videos on YouTube, and most of them are probably about an hour long, and to be honest, it's really hard to keep your attention span for an entire hour, as I have learned attending lectures in university for multiple years now. But I also wanted to analyze things a bit differently because in a lot of these reviews, you're just getting a review. You're not really getting any analysis. And what I like to do in my analysis is I like to take the events of a certain book, and then I like to give a detailed outlook on them from a different point of view, from an English major's point of view, which is where you have to make different connections. You have to look at different theories. You have to basically give your own diagnoses, and not from a medical point of view, but your own diagnosis from an intellectual point of view, where you look at the theories and interpretations that you're given and analyze them without showing and telling, and without necessarily giving a full-on review. Because one of the things you want to do when you're analyzing something is avoid plot summary. Sorry, I got thirsty. But plot summary is something that I think a lot of people fall into. And when you fall into plot summary, you get redundant and you don't really give any room for analysis. So I want to look at the Sinestro Core War from a couple different points of view. I want to look at it from a point of realism, and also from almost a point of sympathy in a way, because when we look at villains, we sometimes neglect the reasons of why they become the way that they are. So, Green Lantern, Sinestro Core War, let's get to it. I think this book's actually relatively realistic, and I say that because I think the underlying theme of interpersonal tragedy is something really prominent in it. What I like about it is it's not just about the tragedy of Hal Jordan, it's also about Sinestro and how Sinestro unleashes his tragedy on everybody else, because, for lack of a better term, all hell breaks loose when Sinestro finally gets power. So what Sinestro does is he obtains power, he steals a Guardian ring, and then he becomes a Yellow Lantern. But he becomes a Yellow Lantern because he feels betrayed in the first place. And this is how a lot of villain origin stories go. When somebody feels betrayed by somebody else, they think that they're in the right to act. And sometimes villains will know that their acts are very, very harsh, and also they're very morally wrong. But they neglect that because they believe that somebody did something morally wrong to them first. So Sinestro, he feels betrayed when he's banished from the Green Lantern Corps. And that feeling of betrayal becomes a feeling of envy, and then that feeling of envy becomes a feeling of wrath. It's almost like a little theme of the seven deadly sins here. And that is why Sinestro begins what he begins, by taking the ring, becoming a Yellow Lantern, and unleashing chaos all over the place. And the color yellow that Jeff Johns uses is very interesting, because yellow is supposed to instill fear, and it seems that the color yellow is almost the kryptonite to the green of the Green Lantern Corps, even though a lot of kryptonite is green, unless you watch Smallville and you know that Clark Kent, aka Superman, is actually complementary towards red kryptonite in its own weird way, even though it does have its detriments. Anyway, the yellow of the Yellow Lantern is the kryptonite of the Green Lantern, which I find very intriguing, because Jeff Johns lays out a series of colors as like almost a diagram, and he lays out exactly why each of these colors is either detrimental or beneficial. And Sinestro knows this, so he uses the Yellow Lantern to know to inflict pain and power. And if you look in events of world history, a lot of leaders felt betrayed by something, whether it was morally, ideologically, sentimentally, even when they were younger. They feel betrayed, so they're going to act upon that. And that's exactly what Sinestro is doing here. Because Sinestro, in his mind, believes that this is the right way to go, even though he knows that the means to get there are very, very, very bad. And what he does too is he acquires entities that he knows are going to run through the entire Green Lantern Corps. So, entities like Superboy Prime. So if you look at Superboy Prime, if you remember in Infinite Crisis, he's taken on 3 teams at the exact same time and giving them a run for their money and taking out a lot of people. So Superboy Prime is a really, really strong one. And if I said Superman Prime earlier, I'm sorry, I can't remember. But it was Superboy Prime. And Superboy Prime in Infinite Crisis was a major problem. So Superboy Prime is a big one. And then also you have Cyborg Superman. And if you know, after the death of Superman, Cyborg Superman was a massive, massive villain and very, very dangerous. Not just to Superman, but to everybody. So Sinestro is getting people who have power. And if you look closely, it's intergalactic power. It's not power from Earth. It's power from elsewhere. So you have Cyborg Superman, non-Earth entity. You have Superboy Prime, basically a non-Earth entity. And then you have the king of the multiverse, the Anti-Monitor. So you have 3 of the most dangerous galactic personalities that are going to come down to Earth and threaten Earth, which is a very, very unique narrative. And one of the things, too, that I find really good in this is humanity and Earth is not entirely criticized. If you look at a lot of comics, there's almost a theme of superiority over entities in human beings. So human beings are looked at very low and very less than, very ignorant, very, very unintelligent. So there's a lot going on here. And in this case, the Guardians, they don't look at human beings as less than. They don't look at them as unintelligent at all. They look at them as actually having something that they don't have. So that's why guys like Hal Jordan, Guy Gardner, and Kyle Rayner are all acquired to bear the rings, because they have something that the other intergalactic entities do not have. And sometimes human beings just have willpower. And that's exactly what Jeff Johns talks about in the Sinestro Core War, is the theme of willpower. And Jeff Johns, he writes very metaphorically, very similar to how I write. So I really do like Jeff Johns' writing. And I think that the metaphorical writing helps, especially when you're looking at intergalactic entities and space and time travel, multiverses. I think that it's very, very beneficial. And I'm not always the biggest fan of multiverses, because I think they can get overcomplicated. I think they can get confusing for an average reader, and I also think that sometimes they do a disservice, because you have too many proverbial cooks in one kitchen. But I think this is a multiverse story done right, because you have a focused narrative, and it's a theme of revenge, it's a theme of vengeance, and a theme of control. Because Sinestro, if you look from the perspective of world history, is a dictator who was wronged, and he's coming back for that vengeance that he wants, and he wants it through power and through control. And he can control Cyborg Superman, he can control Superboy Prime, and he can control the Anti-Monitor. So that's a fun perspective to look at. And then you also have people like, or not people, or entities like Arkillo. So you have Arkillo, and he's almost like a dictator himself, and then he has to go against Kilowog. So you have the 2 top physical entities going at it right there, which that is such a fun battle. So there's so many different ways to look at this. And when you look at it too, a lot of these intergalactic entities, they're almost like another form of human. So maybe Arkillo is a human, but he's just a human that we don't know. Same thing with Sinestro. Sinestro can be a human being, but he's not stereotypical human being that we look at. So that's also questioning us as human beings to decipher what human beings truly are. Are they just on Earth, or are there different kinds of human beings that we're not even educated on in the multiverse? So I think that's a fun little question that maybe Jeff Johns was sending our way. But like I said, a lot of the other later issues are very battle based, and it's about Hal Jordan finally getting to Sinestro, and also the theme of Kyle Rayner being abducted basically and being possessed with Parallax over Ion is really, really awesome, because if you remember the Green Lantern Rebirth, that's where Jeff Johns was discussing the lore of Parallax, and how Parallax is this controlling entity that will strip you of everything and will strip you of your higher power and basically instill that fear in you, because Sinestro runs off of fear. And Sinestro in the Sinestro Core War makes you fear to the point that you acquiesce. And that's very, very similar to dictatorship, because if you look at dictatorship, fear will be instilled, whether physically or intellectually. And what happens is that fear causes the casual person to acquiesce to the demands of the dictator. And that's what Sinestro does here. And he's trying to do it when he comes down to Earth, because he knows that's where, again, human weakness is, and also where Hal Jordan, Kyle Rayner, and Guy Gardner reside. So it makes it a really fun dynamic here, really interesting dynamic. And you have a conflict that is actually realistic in an unrealistic environment. So that's my take on the Sinestro Core War. I might even do a part 2 of this, because I think there's even more that you can discuss. But this is what I have, just from, again, a practical point of view. And I think it was a lot of fun. So let me know what you guys think. Is the Sinestro Core War realistic in an unrealistic environment? Is Sinestro a dictator that maybe you have researched before on Earth? Is there anybody that comes to mind? Because I know I have a couple people that would come to mind. So let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe too, because we are almost at 500 subscribers. And if I can get to 3,000 watch hours, well, then I can become a YouTube partner and put out better content for you going forward. See you soon.